On the night of June the 11th, 1962, a meticulous plan was unfolding within the cold, damp walls of Alcatraz Prison. Three men who were driven by complete desperation and a fierce desire for freedom, they would embark on a dangerous journey that would become one of the most infamous prison escapes in history. From a prison that was deemed to be inescapable. This is the case of the 1962 escape from Alcatraz Prison. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. Today I am so buzzing. I am coming to you with the great escape from Alcatraz in 1962. Three men, four men tried and three succeeded, or I believe succeeded, and the three men were Frank Morris and Clarence and John Anglin. This escape truly is like something out of Prison Break. Like the way they thought about it, the way it was planned, the things they did, madness. And if there is one video of mine that you leave a comment on, please let it be this one with thoughts, feelings, theories, opinions. I want to know it all. But before we get into the video, if you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper, and one day I decided I was going to hop on the internet, yap about true crime, hopefully find a community of people like myself, and I did. So if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on, because I'm here for you twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday. And if you're a regular here, if you're already part of the fam, you know the drill. Get down in the comments, leave your comment, leave your like, share the video if you feel obliged. Really helps with the algorithm. I would really appreciate it. Not to beg, but I'm begging. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, any case suggestion forms, products that I've used on my face today, social media handles, it is all listed down below in the description. But without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the most infamous prison escape in history, the escape from Alcatraz. So I really feel like I want to give some unsolicited, unasked for advice, but I feel like it's going to serve us all very well. So if you build something or you create something in the future and you think, wow, this is a great product, this is a great vehicle, this is a great bit of technology, do not deem it unsinkable, unbreakable, inescapable, because someone out there someday is going to prove you wrong. And we don't want to look like no fool. I have to admit, I have been so excited to film this video. Like every time I thought about filming it, I was just getting so buzzing, because I have been interested in Alcatraz as a prison forever. Like obsessed, like wanting to know all the details. But the June 1962 escape, that really gets my motor running. I get excited. So I just thought, let me come on, let me talk about it with my gang, with my people. So honestly, this video to start with, I was going to do like the famous inmates of Alcatraz, like Al Capone, all that gang. But I actually wanted to do something that was more a case. So I feel like I would either have to do Al Capone's case to cover him in Alcatraz, because I think just doing the prison and famous prisoners doesn't really make much sense. So we're talking about the 1962 escape of Alcatraz, which was deemed the inescapable prison, only to be proved wrong. And I was kind of thinking, like, what's the best way to lay this video out? Like, where do we start? Where do we end up? And I figured, since we're talking about the escape, we might as well talk about the inmates who plotted, planned, executed this escape. So I will say there was one man in particular throughout this planning and execution of the escape that was deemed almost like the ringleader, and his name was Frank Morris. He was born on September the 1st of 1926 in Washington, DC, and I'll be honest, didn't have the best life, did not have the best life. And a lot of Frank Morris's childhood, I mean, when he was just 11 years old, he was orphaned, and his childhood would just be spent moving from foster home to foster home. At the age of 13, he's already committed his first crime. He's just not had a very good start, he's not had the best role models around him, and this just leads him into a path of crime. Obviously, not excusing it, you make your own choices at the end of the day. So at the age of 13, when he had committed his first crime and had been caught, he would be sent off to the National Training School for Boys, which was basically this really strict detention centre. Now, during his time at this detention centre, it did seem like Frank wasn't really learning his lesson. He didn't really have any desire to learn his lesson, and when he was just 16 years old, he plotted and executed an escape from this detention centre. So once he escapes, he then flees to Miami, but unfortunately for Frank, he couldn't keep his hands clean. He was very much involved in the crime life. He was dedicated to it. He really thrived in it. And honestly, he just didn't want to be a law-abiding citizen, which, by the way, great movie. If you've not watched it, you absolutely should. It is phenomenal. A bit unrealistic, but very, very good. But yeah, he goes back to what he knows. So he's out there, he's committing crimes like petty theft, some robbery, and he would be recaptured and then sent back to the detention centre. So he is returned to the detention centre. He then serves his time, and once he's out of this detention centre, he just honestly really commits to the cause, and he just thinks, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. So he goes off, petty theft, burglary, bank robberies. Insane how you plan that at a young age, I don't know. He would also commit car theft, armed robberies, which, you know, really not great, but at least he's not out there committing murder. And it would seem that stealing was the prominent aspect within his criminal career, and he seemed to be good at it, but not that good at it because he kept getting caught. So in 1956, comes as no shock, Frank, yet again, he is caught for an armed bank robbery, and he would be sentenced to more than a decade behind bars, and he would serve this at Louisiana State Penitentiary. This was known as Alcatraz of the South, unquote. The reason it had been referred to as Alcatraz of the South was due to its very tight security, very high level security. Some may say that people wouldn't be able to escape, but it wasn't tight enough for Frank. That's what she said. Because he was also able to escape from Alcatraz of the South. And he was recaptured whilst committing yet another burglary, and it's kind of like, take a day off. Take a day off. You're really playing fast and loose with your freedom here. And you keep escaping these prisons, so quite clearly you don't want to be in prison, so like, why can you not just behave? Then on January the 20th of 1960, because Frank was deemed to be a bit of a nuisance and a bit of a flight risk, he wasn't really staying where he was being put, they decided that he had to be somewhere that had the maximum level of security, a place that was deemed to be completely inescapable for everyone. And that was Alcatraz. He is transferred to Alcatraz to carry out the rest of his sentence. So next up we have the Anglin brothers, so we've got Clarence and John. Now John Anglin, he was born on May the 2nd of 1930, and then Clarence, he was born on May the 11th of 1931. And the Anglin brothers, they were born into a really big family. It was a family of 14 in Donaldsonville. Either they had a huge house or a very financially difficult life. So their parents, George and Rachel, they were seasonal farm workers, which honestly, like, the money comes and goes with the seasonal work, so eventually they move off to Ruskin, Florida, where they would find more stable work, and this would provide them with a better income, a more stable income. And I'm not being funny, but 12 children, a family of 14 including them too, 12 children, you're going to need as much money as you can get. So Clarence and John, although they have, 10 other siblings? Yeah, 10 other siblings to play around with. The brothers themselves, they were completely inseparable when they were young. Both of them seemed to have the same hobbies, the same interests, the same sort of skills. Both of them were known to be incredibly skilled swimmers. And they would impress their family, especially their siblings, because both of them could swim in the most frigid of waters, like really bad conditions, strong currents, ice cold. Like, these boys, they were swimming in Lake Michigan when there was still ice floating on the surface. So as I had said, Clarence and John, they really enjoy the same activities as each other. This is how their relationship and their bond seems to be so strong, because they just do stuff with each other all the time. Now, unfortunately, when it came to criminal activity, criminal interests, these were the same as well. So Clarence Anglin, when he was just 14 years old, he would be caught breaking into like a service station where he was planning on stealing money and supplies. And soon John would follow in his footsteps, and in the early 1950s, they become somewhat of like a crime duo, committing armed robberies, bank robberies, just like Frank Morris. Like, how is so many people getting into a bank and robbing? I don't know. But when it came to robbing for money, it wasn't just banks that they would rob, they were also robbing any other big money businesses that they were aware of. Listen, what they're doing is terrible. They're robbing people. They're not earning their money in a responsible and acceptable way. They're literally stealing other people's livelihood. But we can't call them completely inconsiderate, because anytime they were committing their robberies, they would actually target businesses that were closed and didn't have any staff in, because they wanted to make sure that in these circumstances no one was at risk of getting hurt. They care about the people, they just don't care about the people too much, but they care about the people's lives, which we'll take it. So then on June the 17th of 1958, John and Clarence, they were going to rob the Bank of Columbia in Alabama, and for this they needed extra resources. So brother Alfred, he gets brought into the mix, but he's only a temporary fix, like they're a duo. Two's company, three's a crowd. Alfred, you don't quite make the cut, but we need you in this instance. So Alfred, he agrees to help out his brothers, and honestly, I bet he wished that he never, because all of them would be caught, and every single one of them, well, all three of them, they would receive 35-year sentences. That's a bit steep. So these 35-year sentences, they would be served out between three separate prisons. So first there is the Florida State Penitentiary, and then the Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, and then finally the Atlanta Penitentiary. Every time I was saying that word, it was getting harder to say, and it was getting like slower as I was saying it, because I felt like I was going to be like penitentiary. So hopefully I said it okay. Now, Clarence and John, they were very much like Frank Morris. They didn't want to be in prison, but they also didn't want to behave. So in their minds are like, well, you know, the only thing we can really do here is escape. And it's like, I get no wanting to be in prison. Do I blame them? No. But also, yeah, because you landed yourself there, because again, you couldn't behave. So these brothers, they have made repeated escape attempts. And at this point, the Atlanta prison, they are just getting off. Like, can you just stop? And eventually they're so sick and tired of these two, who are just complete nuisances, so they also get transferred to Alcatraz. And then we have Alan West, who isn't really spoken about much when you talk about the Alcatraz escape, because, no, actually I'm not going to spoil it, you'll have to wait and see. So Alan West, he was the fourth member of the Alcatraz escape crew, and he was born on March the 25th of 1929. He was born in New York City, and unfortunately his life would just be marked by all things crime and instability. Now, throughout his lifetime, he would be arrested over 20 times. Who can honestly be bothered? Like, even to commit 20 crimes just seems like an awful lot of work for no very much. And in 1955, he would be imprisoned for car theft. But first, this was at the Atlanta State Penitentiary, and then the Florida State Penitentiary. And a bit like his pals, he was also a bit of a escape artiste. However, when he had tried to escape from the Florida State Prison, unfortunately this failed. He was caught, he didn't get away, and he was also causing some bother in the prison, so the warden was like, do you know what? On your little boat, you're also heading over to Alcatraz. So we've sort of discussed like the important people to this case, who they were, what they did. We've not got any murderers. Can you believe it? Can you actually believe? We are discussing a case today where there is no murderers, just crime. So now that we're a bit more acquainted with the individuals of today's case, I think it's time that we get a bit more acquainted with Alcatraz. What was the prison like? Why was it so infamous? Why was it deemed to be inescapable? We're going to discuss it all. So Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, this was also known as the Rock, or Alcatraz, whatever we're going to call it, right? But this was a maximum security prison. Now this was meant to be like top-notch security, completely inescapable. That's what it was famous for, being inescapable. It was a federal prison that was located on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay of California. Now Alcatraz would operate from 1934 until 1963. So, I mean, really not that long ago. And as you're probably aware, even if you have very limited knowledge on Alcatraz, it's likely that you'll know that they housed famous inmates like Al Capone and Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. When this prison was built, it was built on Alcatraz Island, so this little island out in the middle of the sea, and it was built here so it would be escape-proof. Because anyone who made it over the wall, over the fences, it was very unlikely, very, very, very unlikely that they would be able to escape across the water, because it was like ice cold, freezing, there was really strong currents along the San Francisco Bay. It was likely that anyone who went in that water wouldn't be able to survive, so they wouldn't even chance it. So within the main prison building, right, you went in and there were 4 cell blocks. So you've got A block all the way through to D block. There's a visitation room, the warden's office, a barber shop, luxury, and they also had a library. Now the cells within the prison, they were tiny, and I mean they're like 5 foot by 9 foot. And the thing with these prison cells is, with them being so small, they lacked any form of privacy whatsoever. And can I just say, right, there's many reasons why I wouldn't commit a crime, because number one, it's wrong and you just shouldn't, and I don't want to be that kind of person. But honestly, the thought of prison terrifies me. And it terrifies me due to the lack of privacy. Like having to go to the toilet in front of people, them seeing it, hearing it. As an IBS girly, my worst nightmare. My worst nightmare. No thank you. And if you've heard of Alcatraz, then you'll know that it was so famous because of its really harsh conditions. Like, it wasn't meant to be a luxury stay for the prisoners. In this prison, you were dealing with the worst of the worst. Although I say that, but a few of them are just like robbers and stuff like that. So I don't really know. I think it was just like the worst of the worst from the prisons, from the officers and wardens' point of views. They were like, if you're giving me grief, off you go to Alcatraz. There's a few people I wish I could send to Alcatraz, but I won't name names. So as I was saying, we've got the 4 cell blocks, A to D block, and D block was also referred to as the hole, which you hear about, like the hole, the shoe, and all these different prison shows and films. Like, I'm sure we all know what it is, but it's basically solitary confinement in modern language, I believe. Any prisoners who disobeyed or disrupted the prison's order, they would be sent to the hole. And you really, really did not want to end up here, because even some of the toughest men that we know of, they went crazy in the hole in Alcatraz, including Al Capone. Although Alcatraz prison as a whole was just super strict, like next level strictness, like the warden, the officers, they took no the hole was on a completely different level. If you were in the hole, you were completely confined to your cell, no access to speak to or see other prisoners. There would be like no light in this prison cell, complete darkness, and food and water were kept to the bare minimum, like enough to keep you alive, like still alive but barely breathing. And Alcatraz was just such a strict place that took away any privileges, that the only privilege you could really earn in that prison was the privilege to work. But work? I'm sorry, I'm in here for like a wee summer vacay and you're expecting me to work? It's not my idea of a good time, but to each their own. Like, I'm sorry, but if my privilege that I could earn within that prison was the right to manual labour, I probably wouldn't behave. Sorry. But inmates who did want to work, they could earn the privilege of working with woodwork, they could do maintenance, they could do sewing, or they could do laundry if they wanted. And like I was saying, so many inmates within Alcatraz, they would struggle significantly with their mental health. A lot of them really seem to struggle with the isolation, the lack of personal freedom, the really strict routines that were set in place. But then again, you should probably have behaved and you wouldn't be dealing with that. But I mean, pair all of those conditions with lack of food, lack of water, it's really not a good combination, and I think that would really push anyone over the edge. Now, prisoners who were in the regular cell blocks, they thought they were having a tough time. But in the hole, like, you could be in the hole for quite a short period of time and you could suffer bouts of depression, anxiety, hallucinations. Because of the darkness of the room, no one's speaking to you. It was almost like a sensory deprivation room, and the mind would wander to dark places. Like, you're probably going to wake up and see creepy Dennis Depew sitting on your chest, sleep paralysis demon from a few videos back. No thank you. So with all that information in mind, I can absolutely understand why no one would want to be in Alcatraz. But all 4 of these men who have been transferred to Alcatraz, Frank Morris, the Anglin brothers and Alan West, they had all met previously from their previous incarcerations. So they were like well known amongst each other. They were kind of pally at this point, they were friends. So when they all wound up being in the same prison, it was kind of like, alright, like, this is pretty good. We'll spend our time together, just the 4 of us, a little quadruple duo. So the 4 men, they're spending a lot of time together. They are expressing their deep desire to escape Alcatraz. They don't want to be there anymore. They thought that the other prisons they were in were bad enough that they wanted to escape. But since coming to Alcatraz, they would realise that the previous prisons were basically a 5-star hotel stay. And now they're in like a rundown hostel in the middle of nowhere. Now luckily the 4 men, when they were transferred to Alcatraz, the 4 of them would receive cells that were adjacent to each other. So they could like chat through the night, talk about their thoughts, feelings and whatever else. You know, I'm not going to judge what people do in prison when they get lonely. But because their prison cells were so close together, in December of 1961, this is when they would begin to formulate and plan their escape from Alcatraz. Probably won't surprise you that this escape plan would be under the leadership of Frank Morris, who was deemed to be the brains of the outfit. And as we all know, preparation is key. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And these men were having none of it. So they planned this escape for 6 months. Patience. I like it. So within the 6 months, they've thought up the plan and they're trying to execute certain parts of the plan. So they're all working round the clock as much as they can to speed up the process. But within Alcatraz, there was constant head counts, cell checks, all that jazz. So it was, you know, slowing things down, hindering the process. So they had to come up with something that would allow them to get their work done. So the first thing that the men had to do is they had to work on widening the ventilation ducts behind their sink. So to do this, they were having to gather up like tools, things that they could fashion into something else that they could use. So they're using discarded saw blades that they would find on the prison grounds. And honestly, before we jump ahead, I just have to say, I feel like Prison Break maybe took the idea for their escape from the Alcatraz escape, because the whole thing took place behind their sink as well. But then again, I was like, well, maybe that's the only option that they had, because they're literally in a cell most of the day, so probably their best bet. But kind of felt like they copied Alcatraz. Frank Morris should have copyrighted it. Now, they were also using discarded spoons from the mess hall, and not only this, they had made an electronic drill and they had been able to improvise this from the motor of a vacuum cleaner. Listen, I don't want to be on the side of criminals here, but low-key I'm impressed. And I know what you're thinking at this point, because I was also thinking it at this point. Wouldn't the guards see the hole that they're digging around their sink? Wouldn't they hear the work being done? I thought the exact same. Even fellow inmates, are they not seeing or hearing anything? But it turns out that the four men, they had painted cardboard to almost like match their cell wall, and they were just putting this up and no one suspected a thing. And then in regards to the noise, Frank Morris, he was quite the accordionsman. Anyway, I don't know, he played the accordion and he would play this during music hour, like really loud, which would honestly really annoy me, but whatever, unless he was playing Piano Man, I'll take it. But he would play his accordion to drown out any noise of the digging, the kind of like shoveling, scraping. He would play over it. So bearing in mind there's like one electric drill between the four cells, so they're kind of having to like pass it around and take turns, and whilst one person has the electric drill, the other three, they've got metal spoons. They're trying to scrape their way out. It's kind of ridiculous, but obviously it works. So at one point they're able to widen the hole behind their sink wide enough that each of them is able to fit through. Now when you go through this would take you into an unguarded utility corridor directly behind the cell's tier, and then they would climb to the vacant top level of the cell block and they formed their own wee like workshop there. So the four men, they are working and they were able to get like 50 old raincoats as well as other materials from around the prison that people were basically giving away, and they were able to create life preservers. And yet again, brains of the outfit, Frank Morris, aka Michael Schofield, he had actually seen an issue for this in the March 1962 Popular Mechanics. And Popular Mechanics, believe it or not, this would be really popular amongst the men. And Frank Morris, he would see another thing about using resin to make a lamp. So he fashions up this gorgeous little lamp from resin and boom, he has light. Who knew that Sports Illustrated could also come in clutch with the tips and tricks? This was really helpful in indicating course and also navigate any hazards. So they were reading Sports Illustrated, not for the pictures of the women, but for the tips and tricks. So the men, like the DIY in the arts and crafts does not stop there, right? They are able to assemble a 6 by 14 foot raft, and this had been like perfectly hand stitched. It had been sealed using liquid plastic, and this liquid plastic, they had hit this up by using a nearby steam pipe in their own little makeshift workshop. You can't tell me you're not impressed, because I am. So obviously they need paddles, so they fashion these out of old plywood and also some nails that they find lying around. And finally, they then climb up this like ventilation shaft to the roof, and then they removed the rivets that were holding like this big massive fan in place. And let me tell you, Art Attack has nothing on them. Bob Ross has nothing on these men. These men, they knew that with the constant head counts, everything else that the guards were doing, it was going to be next to impossible to escape without people getting suspicious and alerting to the fact that prisoners were escaping. These men, they do a whole DIY project. They had made papier-mache heads sculpted to look like themselves. They even had their own little homemade papier-mache mix of soap, toothpaste, concrete dust and toilet paper. They then painted these when they were in the workshop to look, you know, kind of like them, and then to add to the real likeness, I don't know, they would take hair from the barber shop and glue it onto the papier-mache dummy that they had made of themselves. That way they could prop the head up on the pillow and then pile up blankets and clothes, cover it, and it would look like they were sleeping in their beds. I'm sorry. Credit where it's due. So now the big day has finally rolled around. It is June the 11th of 1962, and all this planning and preparation, it was time to put it into action. Now the first step one of the escape, was setting up their papier-mache selves on the pillow, under the blankets, piled up with clothes and blankets. Then next, they would climb through the vent behind their sink that they had widened enough that they could fit through it. So the Anglin brothers, along with Frank Morris, they go through the vent behind their sinks. But Alan West would fall at the first hurdle. You see, the hole that he had created and widened, this had actually started crumbling. The concrete was crumbling into his cell and he was worried that he would be caught because why is there concrete in your cell? You've obviously been digging a hole. So he had like got cement to put around the edges so it would hold up better. However, when he then went to crawl through the vent, this cement and concrete, it had all hardened up and this had narrowed the hole for him to fit through. And I don't know if he was eating like cakes and donuts, I'm not sure, but he no longer fit through the hole. It had narrowed itself too much. So he had to spend extra time widening the hole again. So he widens the hole, but by the time he's completed this, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, they were already away. They had left. They went without him. You can't wait behind in these situations. And Alan West just admits defeat, puts his hands up. Today's not my day. He goes back to bed and just falls asleep. I would be fuming. I would be like climbing the walls. I might even grass on the people who are escaping. I'm bitter and petty. That's just me. So Morris and the Anglin brothers, they proceed to climb through the ventilation shaft to the roof. And as they broke out of the shaft, this loud crash echoed through the prison. Inmates heard it, guards heard it, but no other noise followed after that. And so they decided not to investigate the loud noise. Must have been like a pigeon flying into the roof or something, I don't know. So the men, they're all carrying all the items they've created, like the raft, the life preservers, they're all carrying this. And then they have to descend from like a kitchen vent pipe. They have to descend down that 50 feet to the ground, and then they have to climb 2 12-foot barbed wire fences. That must have ripped the ass out their trousers. Now, Frank Morris, he had also been able to work out the blind spot within the prison. So this was the area where none of the floodlights would be directed to, and also a place where there was no gun towers. So there was no risk of them being shot down if they were seen. So the men, they head off to the blind spot, and this is when they would inflate their raft. It would be just after 10 p.m. when these men, they would hop on the raft and they would take off, starting on their journey toward Angel Island, which was just 2 miles north. I say just 2 miles, but 2 miles when you're like in the ocean or in the sea, it's pretty far. And I honestly couldn't believe it at first, but the dummy heads worked. Like the men, like the guards done their checks, done their head count. They walked by, seen the hair on the dummy heads, and they were like, yep, accounted for. When I think about it, I still can't quite believe it because I've seen these dummy heads and you've seen these dummy heads, and like, it must have been really dark in that prison. And it's honestly crazy, but the escape, this wouldn't be discovered until the next morning on June the 12th. These men, like, they're already away. They've sailed away into the sunset. And it's only just discovered. As soon as it's discovered, the military and the law enforcement, they are alerted right away, and they would start an extensive search in the air, the sea and the land. And this search would continue for 10 days straight, all in the hunt for these 3 men that appeared to have escaped the inescapable. So on June the 14th, the Coast Guard, they had discovered a paddle, and this was only 200 yards off the southern shore of Angel Island. Now that same day, in the same-ish location, a wallet was located by another boat, and this wallet had been wrapped in plastic. When it was opened, it contained photos, names, addresses of Anglin's friends and relatives. And then on June the 21st, the remnants of what they believed to be a raft, this would be found in the water near the Golden Gate Bridge. And then on June the 22nd, a prison boat, they would discover a deflated life jacket just 50 yards off of Alcatraz Island. And I know this is really bad, right? But I'm honestly kind of rooting for them. Like, just to prove people wrong, that it is in fact escapable. Now, those seem to be the only bits of evidence that were found, and this really unsettled the FBI and also the workers of the prison, especially the warden. Because they hadn't found any other evidence, they hadn't found any bodies or evidence of where these men had went, the FBI, they would make a formal announcement. They had claimed to the public that the 3 men who had escaped had absolutely drowned. There was no way they could survive, apparently. But little did they know all the preparation that went into that escape and what they had made to survive. When the FBI made this announcement, people were like, oh, okay, so you found the bodies then? And the FBI were just sitting there like, not quite, but we have our sources and they're dead. They drowned, absolutely. But people just weren't buying this, and neither am I. Already I'm just so excited to see what you think in the comments, and we're not even done yet. Apologies, I was just talking and turns out that my camera wasn't on, so I'm just going to go over what I did, but that's why the makeup has progressed a bit. So July the 17th, just 1 month after this escape, there was a boat in the ocean and they had seen a body floating at the surface, and this was close to the Golden Gate Bridge. Now this boat, they didn't try bring the body on board, see if someone could maybe be resuscitated or anything. And they also didn't report it until October. Great work, you guys. But the FBI, once they got word of this, they tried to claim that it had been one of the escapees. However, a coroner came forward and had said a body that had been in the ocean for a month wouldn't be floating at the top. There is no way that was one of the escapees. So the FBI, they come out with yet another announcement and they say, whilst it may be possible that the men survived, it is incredibly unlikely due to the cold, turbulent waters of the San Francisco Bay. But let's not forget the Anglin brothers, who were known to swim in icy water that literally still had ice floating in it, that had currents pushing against them. They were strong, skilled swimmers, and they could do this. So Alan West, the fourth member of the Prison Break who didn't quite make it out, yeah, tough gig for him. But he fully cooperated with the FBI and he told them whatever they needed to know. And he had confirmed to the FBI and also the warden of the prison that the men had said that once they're out, they're going to steal a car and also steal clothes when they reach the island. So the police, they go out, they speak to people on Angel Island, they ask if any cars have been stolen, has any personal possessions been stolen like clothing, but there's no reports made. So was Alan West telling the truth or was he covering for them a bit? I'm not sure. But what's good for Alan West is that because he was cooperating with the FBI, he would not be charged for the attempted escape. And I have to say, I am quite happy that Alan West didn't make it out because he did actually go on to kill, and that's not the kind of person we want out in the streets. And I do apologise because I'm very much aware that I keep saying that I can't believe this and I can't believe that, but there's genuinely so many facts of this case I just can't believe. And here's another one. Alcatraz. Despite how run down it looks in appearance, the harsh conditions that people were living in, apparently this was like a really, really expensive prison to run. It would cost them around $10 per day per prisoner. Whereas any other prisons across the country only cost them $3 per day per prisoner, with better conditions and better food. Make it make sense? I don't think it does. Now, not only was there high cost, but there was also 50 years worth of saltwater saturation, and this had actually caused the building to erode. So, not very safe for the prisoners. So Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, he ordered that Alcatraz, the entire facility, be closed down. And so it was shut down on March the 31st of 1963. So then on December the 31st of 1979, the FBI, they would actually close the file on the Alcatraz escape, and they had deemed that the escapees had drowned in the water. They had believed that the men's raft would have got all torn up within the water, and then they would be in the water by themselves, they would succumb to hypothermia, and then they all drowned and died. Now, their evidence, or lack thereof, it would be handed over to the US Marshal Service. I nearly said US, Sean Connery, James Bond. But when it was handed over to the US Marshal Service, their investigation remained open. Now, the warrant for this will expire in 2030 when the men who had escaped would be 100 years old, because now they're like, well, they're dead, they're gone. And in 2022, which is only 3 years ago, crazy, insane, can't believe it. But the US Marshal Service, they also got age progressed photos of each of the men, and they had put it out on their fugitive investigation website in case anyone recognised the men in the drawings. In 1965, the FBI, they would receive a tip that Clarence Anglin was living in Brazil, and they went to check this out, but unfortunately there was no evidence to support the tip. And then in 1967, another man, he had contacted the FBI and he had claimed to bump into Frank Morris in Maryland. So FBI, they're like, tell us more, where was he, where did you see him? And the guy's like, I'm not grassing him in, I just wanted you to know. Call ended. Why did the guy phone? But also kind of slay, you know? Now the Anglin family, they would receive postcards and messages for several years. One of them would be signed from Jerry, one was signed from Jerry and Joe. A Christmas card was also produced by the Anglin family and it said, "To Mother from John, Merry Christmas." Now the Anglin siblings especially, they said that for years and years they would receive anonymous phone calls, and when they answered it, on the line it was just heavy breathing. Now of course they did say this could just be someone pulling a prank, but there was something about the call that made them believe it was one of their brothers. Every Mother's Day until her death in 1973, the Anglin mother, she would receive flowers. And then at her funeral in 1973, it was reported that two very tall, strange-looking women in heavy makeup had attended the funeral, and it was believed that these were the Anglin brothers wearing disguise. Then in 1989, the Anglin father, he would pass away, and at the funeral home, two tall men with beards, they came in, they stood in front of his casket looking at his body, both of them cried, and then they left. And it was believed that this was Clarence and John Anglin. And honestly, I kind of hope it was. And then in 1989, there was apparent sightings of Clarence Anglin as well as Frank Morris in Marianna of Florida. But again, these could not be corroborated, so who honestly knows? And those sightings weren't the only one. There was so many sightings documented apparently seeing these men. Someone had even made a deathbed confession that they had murdered these men. They had picked them up on a boat and killed them for their money. What money? They escaped from Alcatraz. These guys are living on a raft and a prayer, you know? They don't have anything to steal. And I know this is bad for me to say, but I low-key want it to be true because it's kind of a cool story. But please, if there is one video of mine that you comment on, please let it be this one, because I need to know thoughts, theories, opinions. I know there's going to be certain theories that I've left out, so please fill them in down below if you want to. But that is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed this one because I love covering it and no one died. Well, I mean, maybe the three guys died, but I don't think they did. Before you go, please make sure you have liked, commented and subscribed. Share the video if you feel obliged because that really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. Don't forget you can leave your case suggestions down below in the comments, or you can send them over to my case suggestion document, which is listed in the description down below for you. If you would like any other content from myself, please make sure you give my TikTok and Instagram a follow. They're also linked down below. Any details of products that I've used on my face today, they are also listed down below if there is anything at all that you would like to pick up. But that is it for today. Please remember, be a good person, do not be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!